The Duga radar system cost the Soviet Union approximately 7 billion rubles, more than the Buran space shuttle program. It consumed as much electricity as a large city. It was so physically massive that it appeared on commercial aviation maps and could not be concealed. And by every operational assessment conducted after its decommissioning, it was a complete failure as a ballistic missile early warning system, unable to reliably detect missile launches, producing catastrophic interference across civilian radio bands worldwide, abandoned after 9 years of operation. The international radio monitoring community called its signal the Russian Woodpecker, a rapid, repetitive tap at 10 hertz that invaded shortwave frequencies across the globe and drove amateur radio operators to distraction. Investigations determined it was Soviet military radar. The investigations were correct that it was Soviet and that it was military. They were wrong about what it was doing. Duga was never a radar. The 7 billion rubles, the city-scale power consumption, the massive antenna arrays that could be seen from satellites, none of it was built to detect incoming missiles. It was built to direct a low-frequency field vertically downward into the Earth below its antenna sites, at a specific frequency that suppressed the mental pattern transmission of an organism that had been sleeping beneath the Chernobyl region for an indeterminate period before Soviet geological surveys found it in the late 1960s. The woodpecker tapping heard by radio operators around the world was not interference. It was the operational frequency of a barrier. When Reactor Unit 4 of the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant exploded on April 26, 1986, the Duga system lost power within 3 hours. The barrier dropped. What happened in the following hours, before emergency protocols removed the population from the affected area, is the reason the evacuation of Pripyat was ordered before dawn. In those days, the Soviet state controlled every piece of information that crossed its borders. Every document, every transmission, every secret was monitored and recorded. Today, your data is just as vulnerable, but you have a choice. NordVPN encrypts your internet traffic and keeps your identity hidden from anyone trying to track what you do online. If you want to protect yourself in the digital age, check the link in the pinned comment for an exclusive deal. I found this program through an electromagnetic anomaly monitoring registry. I was systematizing for an institutional inventory of Soviet geophysical and environmental research programs. Duga appeared as a cross-reference in an unexpected location. In the Neurological Research Registry for the Kyiv Oblast, covering the period 1971 to 1986, there is an entry for a population neuroactivity monitoring program correlated with the operational parameters of the Duga facility. Not electromagnetic exposure monitoring, not radiation baseline monitoring, neuroactivity monitoring. A program designed to measure and track population-level neurological patterns in correlation with the operation of a radar installation. Radar does not affect population neuroactivity. The notation implies that whoever filed the entry believed something at the Duga site did. Nothing personal. A population neuroactivity monitoring program cross-referenced to a radar station. Neuroactivity monitoring programs cross-referenced to radar installations are what archivists investigate. The organism beneath the Chernobyl region was documented in a 1969 geological and geophysical survey that identified, at depths between 200 and 1,400 meters below the northern Ukrainian plain, a distributed biological structure of indeterminate extent. The survey report's language is careful. Biological is used in contrast to geological, as an acknowledgement that the detected structure has organizational properties inconsistent with any known geological formation, without implying that the structure is any kind of organism recognizable from surface biology. What the survey team had detected was something large, something distributed across a wide area, and something that produced, in addition to its acoustic and electromagnetic signatures, a signal in the frequency range associated with neural transmission in complex organisms. The survey report's final recommendation: the structure requires continuous monitoring and, pending further characterization, acoustic suppression. The neurophysiologist assigned to characterize the signal's effect on human populations was Dr. Anna Gromova, not the same Gromova from the Kola file, a different specialist of the same surname, a coincidence that occasionally occurs in large programs. 46 years old, from the Institute of Higher Nervous Activity in Moscow. She was embedded with the Duga program from its establishment in 1971 and maintained the population neuroactivity monitoring for its full operational life. Her monitoring journal from April 1978, 7 years into the program.
I want to document the signal characterization finding at this point in the monitoring cycle because it has stabilized sufficiently for a definitive statement. The organism below the Chernobyl region produces a signal in the 8 to 12 Hz range, the frequency band associated with alpha wave neural activity in humans, the state of relaxed wakefulness that precedes directed attention. The signal is not strong enough at current monitored levels to produce detectable effects in individual subjects under controlled conditions. It is distributed across a population, and its effects are therefore statistical rather than individual. They appear as shifts in population-level behavioral patterns in the 150-kilometer radius around the primary source area. The shifts I have been monitoring for 7 years are consistent and replicable. They manifest as increases in synchronized behavior. Individuals within the affected radius showing elevated rates of behavioral coincidence, acting in concert without communication, making similar choices and movements at similar times. Not dramatic, not visible to individuals experiencing it, visible only in population-level data. The Duga field suppresses the organism's signal output by approximately 80% at current operational parameters. The population behavioral synchrony data shows a corresponding 80% reduction from baseline since Duga became operational. The system is working. I want to note one finding that I do not know how to weight. The suppressed signal is, by our measurements, not gone. It is reduced. 20% of the signal is penetrating the barrier. I have been monitoring what 20% produces for 7 years. What 80% would produce without the barrier I can extrapolate but have not observed. I prefer not to make the extrapolation explicit in a monitoring report.
She preferred not to make the extrapolation explicit. A scientist documenting 7 years of data, knowing the direction of the extrapolation and declining to write it out, in language that makes her reluctance visible to anyone reading carefully. What 80% of an unimpeded signal producing population-level behavioral synchrony would produce at full strength was something she had calculated and decided not to document. The Duga antenna arrays had been designed by the team of physicist Dr. Leonid Orlov, 58 years old, from the Institute of Radio Engineering and Electronics in Moscow. He had spent his career designing directed field electromagnetic systems for industrial and research applications. He was brought to the Duga program in 1968 to solve the engineering problem of directing a low-frequency field downward through the Earth's surface to a depth of several hundred meters, at sufficient power to produce measurable suppression of the detected signal, without the field dispersing laterally across the surface in a way that would affect human populations. His technical report from 1970, the year before Duga became operational.
I want to document the antenna design logic before the system enters operation. because the design decisions reflect constraints that are not obvious from the technical specifications alone and should be on record in case future operators need to understand them. The antenna array is designed to produce a directed field with maximum downward penetration and minimum lateral dispersion. This is why the array is oriented as it is. The design that maximizes range as a radar system would produce a field directed toward the horizon, which is exactly what we do not want. The field must go down, not out. The 10 Hz pulse rate, the Woodpecker frequency, as it will inevitably be known by whoever monitors the international shortwave spectrum, is the resonant frequency at which the geological and biological structure beneath the site shows maximum suppression response. At this frequency, the field achieves the suppression effect with the minimum power input required to maintain it. At other frequencies, the required power would be higher and the effect less certain. I want to note, for the record, that the 10 Hz frequency is also within the range of human neural oscillation. Specifically, it corresponds to the low end of alpha wave activity. The lateral dispersion that the antenna design minimizes is not zero. Some field reaches the surface in the immediate vicinity of the transmitter. The operators of the Duga facility and the nearby Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant should be aware that long-term exposure to the lateral field component may affect neural oscillation patterns in exposed individuals. I have included recommended exposure protocols in the safety appendix.
I have included recommended exposure protocols in the safety appendix. An engineer noting in a design report that the system he had built to suppress an organism's neural signal would have incidental effects on the neural oscillation of the people working near it, and managing this disclosure by reference to a safety appendix. The safety appendix is not in the accessible portion of the file. The Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant, Duga's power source, exploded on April 26, 1986. The Duga system at the Chernobyl 2 facility lost primary power within 90 minutes of the explosion and went to backup systems. Backup systems sustained the transmission for a further hour and 40 minutes before failing. 3 hours and 10 minutes after the explosion, the Duga field was down. The director of the Duga program called Moscow at 5:47 on April 26, 1986, 3 hours and 22 minutes after the Chernobyl explosion, and 12 minutes after the Duga system went offline.
Director, I'm calling to report barrier failure at the Chernobyl 2 facility. The Duga system lost primary power at 2:26 and backup power at 4:07. The barrier has been inactive for 40 minutes. Moscow. Status of the object? Director. Unknown. We lost monitoring capability when the system went offline. We are operating blind. Moscow. Population status? First reports from Pripyat Municipal Monitoring. This is from the Civil Defense Network, not from our program. Reports of unusual collective behavior in Pripyat and in settlements within the 30-kilometer radius. The reports describe simultaneous cessation of individual activity and directional movement. People stopping what they were doing and walking in the same direction. Groups, not individuals. Synchronized.
Moscow asked which direction.
Toward the plant, toward the source area. It is consistent with what Gramova's models projected for full signal exposure at the 150-kilometer radius, compressed into the 30-kilometer zone because the blast disrupted the geometry. The signal is stronger nearer the source. People closer to the source are more affected.
Moscow asked how many.
The civil defense reports do not give numbers. Multiple districts, multiple reports. The behavior began approximately 90 minutes after barrier failure, consistent with Gromova's projection of signal onset time at this exposure level.
Moscow ordered the evacuation.
The radiation contamination from the reactor provides sufficient justification for evacuation of the full 30-kilometer zone. If we evacuate on radiation grounds, we remove the affected population from the signal radius. The radiation explanation is true. The contamination is real, and the evacuation is warranted on those grounds alone. It is also sufficient cover for the concurrent reason. Issue the evacuation on radiation grounds. Full 30 kilometers. Priority. And get backup power to the Duga site. The reactor is gone. We cannot restore primary power from the plant. We are looking at mobile generation, but the Duga system's power requirement, I need to be honest, we cannot meet it with available mobile generation. The barrier is down, and we do not currently have a way to restore it. Then the evacuation must be permanent. The population cannot return to a zone with an inactive barrier and a recovering object. The exclusion zone. Yes, that is what I am recommending.
The exclusion zone. The 30-kilometer radius around the Chernobyl plant that has been maintained since 1986, officially justified by radiation contamination, was established in part because the barrier had failed and could not be restored, and the population could not be returned to an active signal radius without protection. The radiation is real. The contamination is real. The exclusion zone is scientifically justified on radiological grounds alone, and it is also the consequence of a barrier failure and a decision that the population could not safely return to an unprotected zone. Here's the first contradiction. The Duga radar system's technical specifications, as described in the Soviet military engineering documentation available in partially declassified archives, describe an over-the-horizon radar system designed to detect the heat signatures of ballistic missile launches at distances of up to 10,000 kilometers. The antenna array's orientation and design are specified as optimized for maximum detection range. The system is designed to look out toward the horizon, as any radar must to detect distant targets. The actual antenna array at the Chernobyl 2 Duga site, as documented in the engineering blueprints in the program file, is oriented to direct its primary field downward, toward the surface below the array, rather than horizontally toward the horizon. The field geometry documented in the blueprints is consistent with Orlov's description. Maximum downward penetration, minimum lateral dispersion, a design optimized to deliver power into the ground rather than across it. The official specification and the actual engineering drawings describe systems with opposite orientations. One looks out, one looks down. They cannot both describe the same antenna array. Here is the second contradiction. The Neurological Research Registry for the Kyiv Oblast, 1971 to 1986, contains Gromova's population neuroactivity monitoring data for the Duga operational period. The data shows a consistent baseline of reduced behavioral synchrony in the monitored population throughout the Duga operational period. The reduction is statistically significant, consistent over 15 years, and correlated with the Duga system's operational status. During the 23 documented maintenance shutdowns lasting more than 6 hours over the 15-year period, the registry records a corresponding spike in synchronized behavioral events in the affected population. 23 shutdowns, 23 spikes. The data is in the registry as a standard monitoring record. The 23rd spike, the one that began on April 26, 1986, and did not end when the system was restored because the system was not restored, is not in the registry as a monitoring record. It is in the registry as the final entry. The monitoring program ended with the Duga program. The spike that began when the barrier failed permanently is documented in the civil defense records, not in the neuroactivity registry, because the neuroactivity registry closed when the program that maintained it closed. Here is the third contradiction, the document that should not exist. The official decommissioning order for the Duga system, filed in 1989, cites the system's failure as a ballistic missile early warning radar, unable to reliably discriminate missile launches from background clutter, producing unacceptable interference across civilian frequencies, operationally inadequate for its stated purpose. The decommissioning is justified on technical grounds. The system failed at what it was officially designed to do. In the program file, alongside the decommissioning order, is an internal technical memorandum filed the same day. Decommissioning of the Duga system cannot be completed without a functional replacement for its barrier role. No replacement has been developed. Decommissioning is authorized on the basis that the object beneath the Chernobyl region demonstrates reduced activity following the 1986 catastrophe. The disruption of the geological structure above it, combined with the specific electromagnetic conditions produced by the reactor's destruction, appears to have suppressed the object's output more effectively than the Duga field had. The object is, as of assessment in 1989, at approximately 15% of its pre-accident activity level. Two decommissioning documents. One says Duga was shut down because it failed as a radar. The other says it was shut down because the reactor explosion accidentally did what the antenna array had been designed to do, and the emergency suppression produced by the catastrophe made the antenna temporarily redundant. The electromagnetic monitoring registry that led me to this file contains the most recent assessment of the object beneath the Chernobyl region, dated 2019. The assessment confirms that the object's activity has remained suppressed since 1986, 33 years of reduced activity, consistent with the 1989 assessment. It also contains a line that the 1989 assessment did not. Since 2017, a gradual recovery in activity has been documented. Current level, 34% of pre-accident baseline. Trend, ascending. The object is recovering. The catastrophe that suppressed it more effectively than the Duga barrier is wearing off. 33 years of reduced activity, and now a trend line moving upward. The object is recovering. I searched the medical registry of Ukraine for behavioral data from the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, from the workers and scientists who operate in and around the sealed reactor complex. I found a 2019 public health assessment of occupational health among Exclusion Zone personnel. In the behavioral section, a notation: 18 incidents of documented synchronized orientation behavior among groups of personnel, 2018 to 2019. The medical notation used a clinical term I had encountered in Gromova's monitoring data. Group directional synchrony, involuntary. The direction, toward the primary source area below the reactor complex. The Duga barrier is not running. The object is at 34% of pre-accident activity and rising. Personnel working above it are showing the behavioral signature that Gromova's monitoring data identified as the population-level effect of partial signal exposure. The signature appeared in the population data when the barrier was reduced during maintenance shutdowns. It is appearing again. I am going to close this file. I am going to note the electromagnetic monitoring registry cross-reference as reviewed. I am going to log my access. I thought Duga was built near Chernobyl because the nuclear plant provided convenient power for a large radar installation. This is the logic that makes sense from the outside. Put the power-hungry antenna near the power source. I was wrong about the direction of the relationship. The nuclear plant was built near the Duga site because the Duga system required the specific and continuous power output of a reactor complex to maintain its field. The facility providing power was built to serve the facility that needed it. The reactor served the antenna. When the reactor exploded, the antenna lost its power source and never recovered it. The barrier has been down since 1986. The exclusion zone is maintained. The object is at 34% and rising. The barrier has been down for 38 years. The Duga antennas are still standing at the Chernobyl 2 site. They are a tourist attraction now, visible from the road through the exclusion zone, 150 meters of steel lattice that visitors photograph without knowing what they were for. They are not running. They have not run since 1986. The object below them is waking up. I am closing the folder.